Okay, while folks are coming in, we'll go ahead and get started. And I want to say good evening to everyone and welcome to another Spotlight Live event brought to you by Spotlight PA. I am Christopher Baxter, Spotlight PA's Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief, and I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. This week is Sunshine Week, and I mean more than the wonderful weather we've been having. Every year, reporters across the country use this week to talk about one of the most pivotal aspects of investigative and public service journalism, and that is access to government records. The basic idea is that a government paid for by the people, working in service to the people, should be fully transparent in its operations. In essence, government should answer to us, not the other way around. And yet, in some cases, government agencies and officials, bolstered by access to taxpayer-funded lawyers, look for every argument to deny records and information to the public, and know they have the resources to take matters to court, something a lot of average people cannot do. Government records are supposed to be public, and the onus is on the government to make a case for why they are not. Too often, however, Pennsylvania's public records law and case law set by the courts since its passage give government agencies plenty of arguments for secrecy. Our best-in-class reporters at Spotlight PA spend countless hours every year fighting these battles behind the scenes to better assess how government agencies are functioning, how taxpayer dollars are being spent, and how well the public is being served or not by its elected officials. In total, in 2021, Spotlight PA filed more than 200 public records requests. So tonight, our panelists will break down the history of the open records law in Pennsylvania, their own fights for information, and talk a little bit about how you can file your own records requests. In addition, we'll be sure to get to some of our questions that have been submitted by folks in advance. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what makes all of this journalism and our programming possible. And by that, I mean you. We need just 15 people today to step forward and make a contribution to Spotlight PA so we can break even on this event and continue our absolutely essential fight for public records and government transparency. So I'd like to pause here a moment and ask anyone who has the means to please make a gift now at spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, that's spotlightpa.org/donate. As a very special bonus tonight, if you make a gift now, it will be doubled thanks to a really generous matching gift from the Benter Foundation in Pittsburgh. That's right. So if you make a gift now, they will match every dollar up to a total of $25,000. Your contributions help us keep this programming free and available to everyone. We use the honor system. If you're here today and you value this work and you can afford to help support it, we need your help. So again, as we introduce today's event, please take a moment and give now at spotlightpa.org/donate. If you're here and you're already a member, I want to say a huge thank you. You've helped make all of our journalism possible, and we simply cannot do it without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. A few last housekeeping items you've probably already seen, but just in case, we are recording today's event to share with those who couldn't make it. Thank you to all of you who have sent questions in advance. We will get to as many of those as possible. If you have not yet asked a question, you can do so using the Q&A feature right here in Zoom. If you look right down at the toolbar and see the Q&A icon, you can type your question right in there. And now I'm excited to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Angela Columbus, our investigative reporter covering politics in Pennsylvania. We have Danielle Ohl, our Capitol reporter covering Pennsylvania's legislature. Jamie Martinez, who is reporting on health in the state, including the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also very lucky tonight to have Paula Knudsen-Burke, Pennsylvania's local legal initiative attorney for the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which provides pro bono legal representation and other services to protect First Amendment freedoms and the right of journalists. A very, very important job and a wonderful group. And last but not least, Eric Arneson, Deputy Treasurer for Communications for the Pennsylvania Treasurer, and importantly, former Executive Director of the state's Office of Open Records, the agency that oversees Pennsylvania's public records and right to know law. Welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's great to see you. Great to have you here to celebrate Sunshine Week. So Paula, let's start with you. Could you just walk folks here tonight through the basics of what is Pennsylvania's right to know law and tell us just a little bit about how it came to be?
Sure. I was busy messaging Berner, one of my Penn State College of Communications professors. So hello, Professor Berner. And it's wonderful to be here tonight and to talk about the right to know law. And actually, Pennsylvania has a really long history of public records access. It dates back to 1957, where our state has said that citizens have a right to certain information. But it wasn't until later decades that access to information really got some teeth to it, so to speak. So there have been amendments to the right to know law over the years since 1957, but probably the most notable amendment would have been in 2008, where the presumption of access flipped. So prior to that, the citizen or the requester had to explain to the government why she wanted the record. Now it's the government who has to say why the citizen or requester isn't entitled to that information. So in 2008, and Eric Arneson, who was one of the architects of that law and also a director of the Office of Open Records, can speak to that. But it really was a sea change. So today in 2022, requesters really are the people who should get the records, and it's the agency who bears the burden of saying why the requester or citizen shouldn't get the information. So really, we've had a right to know law in Pennsylvania for decades, but we're kind of still in our infancy in figuring out how the most recent changes to the law impact all of us who are trying to understand how our taxpayer dollars and public monies are spent in Pennsylvania.
Great, thank you. And real quick, I thought for people who might not be familiar with the Reporters Committee, could you just give a quick overview of what you all do and how important the work is that you do?
Sure. The Reporters Committee is a national organization that was founded 50 years ago, kind of in the wake of the Watergate scandal. And about 2 years ago, what was then a Washington, D.C. Based organization expanded out into 5 different states. So I am the local legal initiative attorney based in Pennsylvania, and I represent clients all across the Commonwealth, including Spotlight PA reporters here. And we have local legal initiative attorneys in Oklahoma, Colorado, Oregon, and Tennessee. And we are all fighting for access to information. And at our national office, we're weighing in on cases throughout the United States in different districts. So, I think Spotlight PA readers know that it's important to get information. And sometimes the only way to pry information out of recalcitrant government agencies is through lawsuits. So thank you, Spotlight PA, for fighting and supporting us in getting that information back to citizens of this Commonwealth. So that's who I am and where my grant is coming from.
Great, thank you. Yes, and it is really important work. I appreciate your kind words. It's a fight we're all in together. Eric, as former executive director of the Office of Open Records, I wonder real quick if you could explain to folks, talk just real quick about what the law is, and the office is a very important component of the process. Could you just give an overview for folks what the office is and what role it plays?
Yeah, absolutely. And Paula did a great job of explaining some of the basics there. And so the Office of Open Records, and by the way, thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm thrilled to be here. I really appreciate that. Thrilled that there are 90 plus people joining us. I just scrolled through the attendee lists. I recognize some of the names there, so it's good to see some old friends here. So the Office of Open Records, it is sort of an intermediary stop. Under the old law, what happened if you were denied access to records is that you filed an appeal with the agency that just denied you access to the records. So you can predict how often those appeals were successful. Then you went to court. So when Senator Dominic Pileggi rewrote this law in the 2007-2008 legislative session, one of the things that he did was create the Office of Open Records. And this was obviously the whole General Assembly was involved, but I worked for him. And so and he was the prime sponsor. So anyway, the Office of Open Records is this independent agency. It is run by an executive director who cannot be fired by the governor because he doesn't like the decisions that come out of the office. Could only be fired for cause, if they were completely ignoring their job or embezzling money, things like that, but has complete autonomy with the decision making of the office, which is absolutely vitally important. And so when you're denied access to records today, if you file a request with your local township, for example, and they say you can't have those records, what you can do is file an appeal at the Office of Open Records. Very simple to do, takes maybe 15 minutes. It's a form on the website of the Office of Open Records. You do not need an attorney. The OOR then assigns it to an appeals officer. Generally, they have 30 days to make a decision. Sometimes they'll ask for more time. I know how busy they are. So if you are asked for more time by the OOR, I encourage you to say yes. But within 30 days, typically, they will turn around a decision. And often you get granted access to the records. Often you don't. They just put out their annual report so people can go look at the statistics. But in a lot of cases, requesters who were denied access to records by an agency, who do not have an attorney, who do not have to appear in court, you don't have to go on Zoom, you don't have to do anything except file that appeal. In a lot of cases, those people wind up getting granted access to the records. So in a nutshell, that's what the OOR is. It is pretty unique across the nation. Now, decisions by the OOR can be appealed to court. That doesn't typically happen. It's a relatively small percentage of cases that go to court, but it can happen. But that's what the OOR was designed to be, a very simple, quick way to get an independent decision on whether the record should be released or not.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think between you and Paul, you've done a good job of sort of setting the table for us about the law, that important update that was made that Paula mentioned, that put the onus on the government to say why records should not be released. Sort of presumption of public records is important. But we do know everything obviously hasn't been sort of roses and butterflies since that update. So now I want to turn to the reporters who are on the ground every day doing the work. Angela, I thought I'd start with you, and I really want to encourage kind of everyone here to chime in for a discussion, because I know you all have some great experiences with this. But Angela, what do you see as the biggest drawbacks of the current right to know law, or weaknesses could be another way to put it, and the process overall as it stands now?
Right. In my opinion, I wish that we could see an immediate change so that the legislature also answers to the Office of Open Records. One of my biggest frustrations in reporting, and I can talk a little bit more about this later, in recent years, has been the fact that when there are disputes, as there often are in public records requests with the legislature, that dispute ends up before a person who is appointed by the legislative leaders. Not to cast aspersions on that, just that, it puts that person in an awkward situation where they have to make a decision that could, hurt their bosses. And in my experience, I have never won a case in the legislature. And that is, not for lack of trying. And correct me if I'm wrong, Eric and Paula, I do believe the row offices also do not answer to the Office of Open Records. I would love to see that change in the law so that all of these offices have to make their arguments in front of an independent body.
Yeah, I'll answer that real quickly, Angela. You're absolutely right about the row offices. I will say at Treasury, we contract with an outside hearing officer. So it is not somebody, obviously they're on contract with us, but it is not somebody who is an employee. And although you haven't won in front of the legislature, there is a case, Levy versus the Senate, which is cited regularly in OOR decisions, where Mark Levy did win in front of the Senate. So it's not impossible.
Well, I will say, Angela, you may be familiar with the case of Angela Columbus versus the Senate of Pennsylvania, currently pending in the Commonwealth Court, where we're seeking to build on the Levy case. And it's true, the legislature, when it wrote the right to know law, rewrote the right to know law in 2008, created different categories of available information. So the judiciary and the legislature are treated differently than your school board, your county, your township, et cetera. And that's something that only the legislature can change through an amendment to the right to know law. But in the meantime, we're fighting in court to make sure that the existing precedent is upheld and that citizens and reporters are able to access information under the current state of law. So that Levy case was really important, and we're hoping that cases that are in the pipeline now are going to continue to uphold it.
Eric or Paula, real quickly, I imagine people are scratching their head right now about why exactly the legislature and the judiciary would not be subject in the same way. Do you recall what some of the arguments were at the time of the update to the law as to why that should be?
Sure, I'll jump in on that. The one practical reason and one sort of more philosophical reason, they are obviously different branches of government, right? And the judiciary in particular, in Pennsylvania state constitution, has a very strongly worded article in the state constitution that is very protective of the judiciary to make sure that they were not subject to undue influence from either the legislative or the executive branch of government. So you will very often see in Pennsylvania law that the judiciary is treated separately, and that's kind of the core reason. In terms of on the practical side, I think it's fair to say, I haven't done this research recently, but certainly back in 2007 and 2008, very few states have a situation where the legislature is treated the same under their, whatever they call their right to know law, as executive branch agencies, local agencies, that kind of stuff. And I think the reason for that is, at least in part, when the law was working its way through, if the legislature had been fully covered by it, I think it's fair to think that the legislators who were in place at that time would have paid a lot more attention to the exceptions, and maybe there would be more exceptions, and maybe the exceptions would be broader because they would have been focused on things that were much more personal to them than sort of the overall philosophical issue. So I'm not trying to make an argument one way or the other on what should or should not be, but that practical reality was definitely something that that was there when we were working this law through back in 2007, 2008.
I will definitely say, there are different interest groups all over the place who back in 2007, 2008 were lobbying the legislature to keep certain things out, keep certain things in. And so the legislation that we have now as our current right to know law certainly was the result of many different interest groups lobbying the legislature to say we should have certain things and not other things. And since then, there have been many attempts to amend the right to know law, to expand it, to expand the category of records that are available, particularly for the legislature and the judiciary. But there hasn't been a ton of movement there. And I will credit then Senator Pileggi, and Eric worked on his staff, really was a huge proponent for moving the right to know law. And we'll see in the coming years if there's another person who will step forward and really advocate to change and expand the right to know law. But at the moment, we have what we have, and that means that there are different definitions for legislative records, different definitions for judicial records. So when citizens ask for records, sometimes they're stymied or confused by the fact that there are these different buckets of information depending on what entity is being requested the information is being requested from. So we'll see. I mean, and in the meantime, we continue to move forward in the courts. And I dropped in the chat Angela's case involving the Senate of Pennsylvania. And she's done a great job of continuing to push for transparency, particularly with legislative expenses.
Great. I want to turn now to the other reporters with us. I'll start with Danielle. What, in your experience, what have you seen as the biggest obstacles to the way the law is now, or the process of the law?
Yeah, so I'm relatively new to using the law in Pennsylvania because I spent the last 4 years reporting in Maryland. So it is difficult sometimes for me to pick apart the law here because it is so much worse in Maryland. And the process is a lot harder because there is no appeals. There is no appeals process where you can argue your case before a body. They can just say no, and you have to go to court, and that's kind of it. There is, a committee that you can file a complaint with, but they have no jurisdiction. There's really no teeth. They can't do anything other than say, yeah, they should give you these records. So I think that while there are many flaws to the law, I'm grateful that there is at least a process by which, you can appeal denials. But I will say, in the work that I am doing, it is frustrating that the legislature has basically written itself out of the law. I mean, I know we just spent some time talking about that, but a lot of things I think would be much easier to report on if we could have a little bit more insight into the process behind the way that bills are made. We know intuitively and from reporting and from talking to people that there is a lot of lobbyist influence. And, I think the USA Today network did a huge project on these bills that lobbyists write for legislators and just send to them and say, here you go, here's my legislation, put it forward. But it's hard for us to get really into the communications of legislators because, their emails are not subject to the law the way they might be in other states or even other, bodies of government bodies in Pennsylvania. You can ask for the emails of a county commissioner, but you can't ask for the emails of a state senator. So that's like the biggest, thorn in my side right now.
Yeah, I think that's good perspective. And Paula just shared a really helpful link in the chat with the RCFP Reporters Committee guide to state by state open records law. And it really is a spectrum. And we talk about bad, of course, from the perspective of a reporter, anything other than full access is bad. But the reality is that states, are, it is a real spectrum. And Pennsylvania certainly is not 50 out of 50 in terms of the state of, how bad a law could be. And we're certainly not number one, which I haven't looked at the Reporters Committee guide, but I would have to imagine Florida is most likely number one. Reporters in Florida enjoy access to what it seems is almost anything. So we're always jealous of their work down there. But we see this in really tangible terms. There are a lot of really important investigative stories, accountability stories that come out in Florida that have really sizable impact that are simply not possible here because the data or the information is not available to reporters. And it's a number of stories. Jamie, I want to turn to you. What's your take on the law as it stands and the obstacles that you face?
Sure. A lot of the work I do revolves around health and occasionally intersects with other entities like schools or Department of Corrections. And a common theme is, we can't release this because it's part of an ongoing investigation, say like an epidemiological investigation, or this risks revealing personally identifiable information. things like that. Or when you're dealing with kids in schools, it's a lot of, not wanting to reveal student information or information that could tell you who a student is that's involved in an incident or a situation or something like that, which of course you want to be sensitive to people's privacy. However, I do wish there were clearer rules and guidelines around how things can be released, but to protect privacy, redact that information in a way that doesn't impede the process and makes these records available. There are ways to get around it. For example, if you're asking for aggregated data, but sometimes it's helpful to have that data disaggregated so that way you can see how certain data points match up. So having some flexibility, understanding that reporters don't always want the name of every single person involved. We just want to understand the patterns in the data. So our reporting is only as good as the data we receive and the records we get. And so it's frustrating when you're trying to do this type of work, but you're told, this whole data set is exempt because it could reveal this, sensitive information. So it looks like Eric wants to jump in here, but.
Just real quick, I just wanted to 100% back up what you're saying. And this comes into another point that we need to think about with the right to know law, is that other laws outside the right to know law sometimes control whether something is public or not. And Pennsylvania's disease prevention and control law is absurdly broad. It needs to be rewritten. It was written in the 30s or the 40s, something like that. And it is just inane in 2020, the kinds of things that they can deny access to. They deny access to simple questions like, how many people in Lehigh County had salmonella poisoning in 2018? And I might have a few of the details wrong there, but that is a real example. It is absurd. I know people in the General Assembly want to get that rewritten. But anyway, I just wanted to back up exactly what Jamie was saying.
No, that's exactly the law I was referencing. It's just a mouthful to say sometimes. But yeah, like Eric said, I mean, there are laws outside of the right to know law, particularly with public health, that affect what can be released and what can't be released. And I think there needs to be more clarity around how we do that, what's permissible. We saw it over and over again with the coronavirus. Other states were releasing information like facility level data related to cases in nursing homes. And yet we didn't have that information for months in Pennsylvania. And then when we did, there were issues with it. So figuring out how we can get this information to people when they need it, particularly in an emergency, and when things are at a slower pace and a reporter like one of us says, hey, I'd really love to dig into this. How can I do it? That there are better supports in place there.
Jamie, I just wanted to weigh in and say, we had a case on behalf of a reporter who at the time was with Public Source, a nonprofit news outlet in Pittsburgh, and she was seeking these de-identified aggregated records about the intersection between pneumonia and influenza deaths and kind of how that played into coronavirus. She lost at the Department of Health. Then she appealed to the Office of Open Records, and then we lost in front of the Commonwealth Court. And the reason was we have these very old laws that haven't caught up with today's kind of happenings. And it was really frustrating because she wasn't seeking any information about particular people. She wanted to tell her readers about what was happening with these different diseases. So Eric is absolutely right. The disease control and prevention law, I think it's of 1955, and also the vital statistics law really need to be updated to reflect today's, how we are today. And there are only a few municipalities in Pennsylvania that have a local county health department. For the rest of the places in Pennsylvania, they rely on Department of Health. And if Department of Health comes back and says, hey, reporters, sorry, we can't tell you this information because of these outdated decades old laws, that's not helpful to anyone. And so hopefully, we'll see some movement to change those laws.
I think this is a really good point, right? I mean, I know we often, when we're fighting to get records and information, we always kind of think, oh, this is a grand conspiracy to deny us this information, right? And I think in some cases, the government is trying to purposely withhold something for whatever reason that might be. But also a lot of these laws do, give the government discretion to release something, even if they're not obligated to. And yet we really don't see that happen very often. And I think people on the event tonight might be wondering, why is that? Eric, maybe you have some insight, or Paula, what happens behind the scenes in these government agencies? I mean, is it sort of a kick it to the lawyer and just get the legal readout and that's it? We're not even, we're not going to kind of think beyond that. Like, what is happening?
So, so God has a sense of humor, right? And when I left the Office of Open Records and came over to Treasury, Treasurer Garrity said, "Congratulations, Eric, you are now our Open Records Officer." So I'm seeing this from exactly that perspective now, and I'm very lucky to work for Treasurer Garrity because she's a very big proponent of transparency. So we have done that, and we try very hard whenever possible, especially when we're working with reporters or just sort of average citizens, and not, sometimes companies and other entities like that are trying to get records, but we try to do it outside the right to know law whenever possible, keep it informal, all that sort of stuff. But speaking from my experience at the OOR, I think that's exactly what happens with a lot of agencies. We have literally thousands of municipalities, counties, school districts across the state. Each one of them has an open records officer. Usually that person has other jobs, sometimes multiple other jobs. And so when it comes to the right to know law, they play it very cautious. They want to make sure, and I think a lot of it comes from actually from a good place. They want to make sure that they're not giving out information that is sensitive or could be used in a bad way, that kind of stuff. They're being very protective. Sometimes it is not. There are times when it is clearly not from a good place, to be clear about that. But I think that's a lot what it is. If people are doing multiple jobs, they are not, issue experts on the intricacies of every verse in the right to know law. And so they're being cautious for the most.
Yeah.
Great. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted
No,
to add
please.
that sometimes those folks are being advised by attorneys in whatever, especially if it's like a municipality. They go to their city solicitor and they say, "Hey, what's the deal here?" And they, the solicitor might say, "Oh, tell them that we can't do that because of HIPAA or FERPA. These are laws that, HIPAA, I think more people are familiar with. It's, meant to protect personal medical information that insurance companies have. It's not necessarily meant to mean that every agency in the world can't release any medical information, but often we do get people thinking that that's what it means. FERPA is a similar thing for, private education information for students. So, it is sometimes a matter of just average people trying to do the best they can and being advised in ways by other people who maybe are trying to protect their interests.
I
Yeah,
saw
absolutely.
a question in the chat about local health departments versus the Department of Health. And there is a difference in terms of the amount of information that's provided to your local health department versus the state Department of Health. So those communities that do have a health department, and again, it's what, maybe 14, 16, it's a very small number. So there are a few cities, I think York, Chester, maybe, they have more access to information than the rest of Pennsylvania. The wide swath of Pennsylvania is left asking the Department of Health, "Hey, can we have information about our health statistics here in, pick your town, Tamaqua, for instance." And then the Department of Health does fall back on those decades old laws. So the communities that have their local health departments are in a better position to be able to provide their citizens with information compared to the communities that have to rely on the Department of Health.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I'm going to turn and just start working in some questions here because there are a lot of good ones. I want to start first with Ralph D, who asks, and I know this is something that our reporters and probably everyone who uses the law has run into, but saying a lot of the times there might be a request and you'll get a response back that says, oh, sorry, those records don't exist, even though you might know they exist for any number of reasons. Maybe you've got, some copy that shows it exists, or some kind of record was filed in a court case, so you know it exists. Paula, how do you advise someone who's running into a that doesn't exist response, who has a feeling that it does indeed exist?
Well, the good news is the Office of Open Records, Eric can talk about this as the previous executive director. They're there to suss out whether or not this is actually true. And sometimes agencies will say, oh, sorry, we don't have those records, and not fill out an affidavit. And the Office of Open Records will require agencies to say with definition and detail why the records don't exist. And if the Office of Open Records appeals officer doesn't buy it, they will not agree to that argument by the agency. So it's really, again, the burden is on the agency to say, sorry, citizen, you can't have this record. And if they want to convince the Office of Open Records that, or a court, that the records don't exist, they must state with particularity and with specificity, we searched X file cabinet, we searched our online databases, we did this, and sorry, we can't find the records. But it really does require detailed granularity, and then sworn under penalty of perjury. And if that isn't, yeah, I see Eric giving me a thumbs up. If that doesn't happen, the Office of Open Records often will kick it and say, sorry, that's not good enough. And sometimes the requester can put in for herself a statement saying, I know this record exists, and I found it in the county archives. It was part of a meeting on X date. And if that's the case, there's going to be the sad violin sound playing for the government entity, because they haven't shown enough evidence to demonstrate that the record isn't there. And the Office of Open Records will say, turn it over. You haven't provided enough information. And that's a really great change in the law since 2008. And we've seen the Office of Open Records continue to develop that and require more detail from the agency. So if you're not seeing it, take an appeal to the Office of Open Records and they'll require it. And that's a good thing. And Eric, I don't know if you want to follow up on that.
The only thing I'll add to that, that's 100% right. The only thing I'll add is that, again, sort of in the not seeing it as a conspiracy, but seeing it as, human beings who aren't always perfect. Sometimes they'll say record doesn't exist because they've done what they thought was a pretty good search. Then when it goes to the Office of Open Records and they get all those requirements on them to explain how detailed the search was, what they searched exactly, they do a better search. And then sometimes they find them and provide them. That doesn't always mean, they were hiding them up front, but it does obviously mean their search wasn't good enough.
Right. Now let's talk real quick. I think the Office of Open Records plays a really important role in this process. It is certainly a real asset to the law we have here. But when a matter is decided, so I'm an average requester, someone here tonight, I've requested a budget. Hopefully you don't have to ask for a budget through the right to know law from your local community, but in case you do, you request the budget, you're denied for some reason, you take it to the Office of Open Records and the office says, you know what, you're right, they've got to turn that over. And the town still says, nope, we're not going to do it. And then that goes to court. When it goes to court, that court, what deference, if any, does that court have to show the office's opinion and its affidavits and its due diligence? Or can the court just kind of rehear the whole matter from scratch and make its own conclusion?
The latter. The court doesn't have to give any deference to the OOR decision. In practice, I think they often do, but legally they are not required to.
And I will say, there's a ton of great questions in the chat, and I'm so glad to see so many of you are making use of the right to know law. But yeah, the courts don't have to follow the Office of Open Records. And if they think that there's something missing, they can inquire into that further. And we're talking about both the courts of common pleas and the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania. So there is a court remedy, although, you know, the Office of Open Records phase, you don't have to have a lawyer. It's quick, it's cheaper. So once you get into court, it is going to be a bit more cumbersome. But yeah, the courts can look into these matters and often have. They've often asked many good questions about some of the agency's assertions. Great,
thank you. Natalie asks, what aspects of the current law still need some work? What amendments are sort of top priority? If we could have, you know, 3 tomorrow, what would be the 3 biggest things we'd want to see? And I'll throw that to anyone who wants to chime in.
Well, I feel like I don't want to talk too much here, but Senator John Blake, who retired from the Senate not too long ago, had a very good bill that had a lot of amendments to the right to know law that I was very supportive of when I was the executive director of the Office of Open Records. The one I will mention would deal with police records, old criminal investigative records. There's a concept, again, I might have some of the details wrong, but this is the general concept at the federal level with FBI files. I think it's after about 25 years, they are presumed to become public. And then if you request a file, the FBI would have to show that there is actually still an ongoing investigation or some other security related reason that they can't release that. But a lot of old FBI files, we see high profile ones become public every now and then, become public. We don't have anything like that right now in Pennsylvania law. And I think it's unfortunate. That's one that would be a top priority for me if I was sort of king of the right to know law for a day.
And I would follow up on that. You know, let's say that there's a person missing and presumed dead. That's going to fall into the bucket of criminal investigation exemption, but there's also the non-criminal investigation exemption. And although these exemptions have gotten better treatment over the years, they're still really broad and you could drive a bus through them. And basically here in Pennsylvania, if an agency says person missing, presumed dead, sorry, that's a criminal investigation, we're not going to get it. So in other states around the country and also under the Federal Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, you might have a different outcome here. If an agency says this is a criminal investigation, you're never going to get it. There's no time limit. And we've seen actually instances, there's an author, Bill DeCock, who wrote a book about murder in the stacks at Penn State University. And this was a woman who was murdered in the Pattee Library decades ago. And he was able to obtain from a different state, and I can't remember if it was Michigan, Minnesota, one of the Midwest states. There, he was able to obtain criminal records related to this investigation. In Pennsylvania, even though the investigation was many years old, he couldn't get them. So we see that playing out here in Pennsylvania. If an agency says criminal investigation, it's not happening, and there's no temporal or time limit. And in other states, we see 25 years, 50 years, things like that. And there was even a case that went in front of the Commonwealth Court where a retired police person, I don't remember if it was a detective or an officer, was interested in finding out what happened with the murder of his family members years and years in the past. And the Commonwealth Court noted with sympathy, we're so sorry, but you can't get this. So criminal and non-criminal investigations could use some work.
I want to real quick flip the script here and consider those people who are responsible for responding to requests. You know, the open records officers in townships and municipalities across the state, some of which are very small, some of which have very small staffs. And you know, in some cases, big requests could be very difficult and very time consuming for them. We've had two questions tonight, one from Jaren B and one from Catherine S, who also asked in advance. For townships and those who have to deal with this, and I think a lot of these requests they are asking about are not media requests, but maybe commercial requests from law firms or folks with other sort of goals and ambitions. Are there any protections in the law for records officers who feel like someone is just abusing the law? They're just requesting reams and reams and reams of information. They don't seem to be doing anything with it. And you know, for some small municipal governments, that could be quite burdensome.
Yeah, unfortunately, right now, there's not a great mechanism. Again, there is legislation pending that would sort of create a process at the Office of Open Records where an agency could say, hey, here's what this reporter is doing. Here's how they have caused us an excessive burden, that kind of thing. That would sort of, they would be arguing that the request was a vexatious requester. And right now, it's really up to the agency to go to court. There have been at least two cases, one in Philadelphia. I don't remember the details, but there was a requester who was specifically prohibited by a judge from filing any records requests with, I think it was the city of Philadelphia, you know, for going forward because he had been so so aggressive with what he was doing in the judge's view. There was another case in Dauphin County where a judge sort of brokered an agreement between a requester and an agency so that the requester agreed that he would only file, I forget the numbers, but something like 2 requests every month. And so that they would slow down the flood and be able to manage it more conveniently for the agency because it had been so disruptive.
Great, thank you. In our last 10 minutes here, I really want to focus and hone in on how people can use the law. And I want to hear, you know, both from Eric and Paula, but also from the reporters, and just start with, you know, based on the wonderful collective experience we have tonight, what makes a good request? What does a good request look like? And you know, where can you get some tips about how to draft one?
That's a great question, and thank you. And again, I mean, we've seen an uptake in people from all walks of life throughout the Commonwealth and the country who are interested in understanding how government works. And so if you have never filed a right to know law request, I would definitely send you to the Office of Open Records. Eric, I know you had a hand in some of those educational materials and making it really easy for people to understand how to file right to know law requests, but there's some biggies. Make sure you're specific and as best you can. And I saw somewhere in the chat where someone was talking about, you know, what can I do to be specific? You do the best you can. I saw an Office of Open Records determination recently where an agency rejected a request because the person was asking about an art board, a committee that advised on art issues, and the requester hadn't named every person, but the requester said, I want information about this art board. And the Office of Open Records said, okay, that's good enough. They named the entity, and also one of the keys is a time frame. So not all time, for all time purposes. If you know that the thing you're looking for was January 2022 through June 2022, put that time frame in. Sometimes people will put keywords. I'm looking for information about the art board or the advisory committee on oil paintings, whatever it is that you know you're looking for. You can put search terms in, you can put a time frame, you can put to and from. I want emails from Angela Columbus to Chris Baxter on such and such a topic, pretending that they work for government. But the more specificity you can include, the better. And Eric, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to you because I see you just posted the Citizen's Guide, which has wonderful examples.
Yeah, Paul is exactly right. You want to have a time frame, you want to have a subject matter, and if you're looking for emails, you want to have at least some pretty decent sense of who you're looking for emails to and from. I mean, those are really the three sort of central components.
And if people
Angela, what
just,
tip would you give, or Jamie, yeah, any of the reporters, what tips would you give from your experiences?
I was just going to add that I've had situations where an agency got back to me and said, okay, we have the records, but it's going to take us a very long time, months or years to get them to you because of the way they're stored. I didn't know what I was walking into with that request, and I've had to just work with the agency to see, are there ways to scale it down? Are there ways that I can rework it so the records I'm asking for are easier to find? So maybe just be prepared in some cases that you might have to do a little bit of back and forth, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, to start that dialogue and start that conversation. And in the process of doing that, you learn a lot about what type of information is available. And at least for reporters, that's part of the story. If a set of records, say it's applications for licenses for some type of facility, if those aren't stored in a way that it's easy to get you the documents as a reporter or as a requester, how are they being used for oversight purposes or governing or decision-making purposes? And that tells you something about the value of the information and how it's being used or not used. So just keep in mind that it might take a little bit more than just submitting the request, but that process of getting it could actually tell you a lot about the records that you're trying to get.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to throw this out there, even though it can be a bit burdensome. I think it's worth it to actually go back and read the law, to have a sense of what it says. Somebody brought up emails in the Q&A. Emails, I've had several battles over the years involving emails. One of the most interesting, fascinating cases, if you have time to look it up, is the Office of Attorney General, the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General versus the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was a case that I was involved in, and really, if I had taken more time to read the law closely, I would have realized that it specifies that at the outset, what you're asking for has to document an activity and the work of an agency. And the emails in that case apparently did not fall within that category, and so we lost the case. But it was a real kind of eye-opening experience for me. But also piggybacking on what Jamie says, I think, and sometimes it's easier for reporters to do this, I do think it's very valuable to have a conversation with an open records officer before you put in, or somebody at an agency, before you put in your request, to get that kind of information that Jamie just talked about. Like, how do you store this information? How can I word it so that it captures this? And this is what I want to capture. I've found that oftentimes it really speeds up the process for me.
yeah, I think quickly, because I know we're running out of time, just to echo Angela, the best request is the one you never have to file because you did your homework and, called in advance and asked, hey, I'm interested in getting citations for, this construction site. Is that something that exists? How are they stored? Are they electric? Are they just handwritten on, carbon copy paper in a file? And by the time you actually get to like putting pen to paper, typing an email to write a request, they might have already given it to you or just sent it in an email. I know the Department of Corrections, I'm doing a lot of work with them right now for a story. Their PIO, public information officer specifically, will tell me, I don't want to, I want to avoid an RTK because that'll take too long. Like, let's see if we can get you something beforehand. So, as long as keep it friendly and try to understand the system, whatever it is that you're trying to get, try to really understand, okay, so there's an inspector and he goes out and he writes the citation and then that goes back and it gets put in this filing cabinet or it gets typed up into this system. It sounds like a lot, but it'll save you a lot of back and forth and trying to figure out what it is that you really want.
And to piggyback on Danielle, in like 30 seconds, I will give a plug to Eric over at Treasury. There's the e-contracts database that is actually part of the right to know law. It's a provision in the right to know law that says contracts with state agencies greater than $5,000 shall be provided to Treasury, that then uploads them. If you haven't checked that out, it's an awesome resource where most contracts are there. You could type in the vendor, for instance, Verizon, take your pick, you can type it in, you can type in Mansfield University, whatever you're looking for, and you get to the record. It's proactively available. Similarly, we have the Pennsylvania Department of State with the lobbyist database, a database that involves nonprofits and profit businesses. So there's a lot out there that doesn't even touch the right to know law in terms of requests. So definitely try to scope those out and get the information as you can. And Eric, do you want to say anything about that Treasury database?
Just that I'm looking for ways to improve it. So if anybody has ideas, please email me, earneson@patreasury.gov.
Right. Yeah. And I'll add, two things from my time as a reporter here in Pennsylvania. One piggybacks off something Danielle said about being friendly. The other end of a request is another human being in a job who has good days and bad days, just like the rest of us. So I've always found, to take the approach of polite but persistent, and whenever possible to just sort of kill with kindness. That getting angry and getting up in someone's face is really not going to get you anywhere. In fact, it's probably going to hurt. You'll have your time, come and appeal or come to court to make those arguments if you're not getting through. But kindness, I think, is a really important part. And then going back to the email discussion, just because so many people do file for emails, to what Paula said and others just about, and Angela about, being specific about a sender, a receiver, a time frame, and any keywords or context. Another just sort of trick of the trade there is to try to avoid the words any and all, because they're sort of a trigger to be overly vague or overly burdensome, because they're kind of not limiting factors. So I've seen a lot of denials where actually the specificity was in the request, but the requester had used any or all in describing the request, and that just triggered a negative response. We have about 1 minute left, so we're gonna maybe go 2 minutes over. I'm gonna give each of the reporters 1 minute, and I want you each to celebrate a victory that has to do with the records law or just transparency in government that you have had in the past year or so, big or small. But let's end this on a positive note of using this law to enhance government transparency. I'll start with Jamie.
Sure. Most of my reporting over the past year has been related to coronavirus and the state's response. I'm not ready to celebrate a big victory yet, but I think we've had a lot of small incremental victories towards understanding how the public health laws are affecting right to know law, what can be and should be available. And I hope to have some good news on that front soon. But to sum that up, better data related to public health moving forward is a goal of mine and something I think we've started to make progress on this year.
Great. Danielle or Angela?
Okay, I'll go. Most of my reporting over the last 2 years has been focused on legislative expenses. And I think that through a lot of diligence and hard work and pushing back through appeals, we have been able to force the legislature to remove redactions from the documents, including really key things like what the expenses were for. And These are no small feats, because in my 16 plus years now in the state capitol, I have found that making change or pushing and forcing change in Pennsylvania is really hard. So I celebrate that victory today.
Like I said, I haven't been here that long, but I think that my recent experience with the corrections department has been surprisingly positive. Usually there's not a lot of transparency in prisons, but I have been able to get everything I asked them for. So knock on wood, I'm working on a story about the population serving life in prison, and I needed data about those people and about attempts to transfer out of prison due to medical need, and I really did not expect to be able to get the kind of data that I needed, but they were really helpful. So that's always good. It's always good to, when I worked in Maryland, I would complain a lot on Twitter about lack of transparency, but I always tried to give a shout out to people who were helpful and positive and got me my stuff quickly. So that is very important. Thank you for the question, Chris.
Great, thanks. Well, to end, I want to celebrate all of the work of all of the Spotlight PA reporters, not just Jamie, Danielle, and Angela here tonight, but the entire team who fights day in and day out to hold the government accountable, to access key and critical information to help the public understand what's going on and how their tax dollars are being spent. So hopefully I can speak on behalf of all of our attendees tonight to thank you for your important work. And I think Sunshine Week should be just as much about celebrating the work that you all do as raising awareness. We're at the end of our time together this evening, and I want to thank everyone, all of our panelists, Eric, Paula, and all of our attendees for a great and informative discussion, fantastic questions. It is really heartening to see this level of interest in our public records law and how to use it. It really has made me very happy this evening. Central to the mission of Spotlight PA is ensuring that Pennsylvanians in all corners of the state, regardless of their financial resources, have access to trusted, nonpartisan, fact-based journalism that informs, equips, and empowers people in their everyday lives. So as we always say at the end of our events, this conversation was just the beginning. I like to think of government transparency as a spectrum, and the more we engage in the process, the more we fight for records, the more we flex our rights under the law and take action when we're denied, the more we can move that needle toward transparency. The more we sit back, the more we allow government to operate without oversight or independent journalists, the more decisions are made in the dark, that needle can quickly tilt back towards secrecy. Today's event was a free public service provided by Spotlight PA, and so this is the time I'd like to remind any of you who have not yet made a contribution and are able to do so. We need just 15 folks tonight to contribute to break even on this event. Thank you to everyone who has given so far. We appreciate your support and your kind words. If you haven't yet and are able, please go to spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, that's spotlightpa.org/donate. Contributions of any amount help us keep this programming free for all, and your support, of course, and as always, goes directly back into our journalism. Thank you to everyone who has become a member tonight. Thank you to everyone who has participated and attended. I hope you have a great night, and we hope to see you again soon.
And
Take care,
happy
everyone.
Sunshine Week.
Happy Sunshine Week with some real sunshine.
Woo! All right.
Thanks all.